Our planet is a beautiful place. It is covered with life, with plants, animals, and humans. Even the Earth itself is alive, and it provides a sustainable life for all who reside on it. And we as humans have the responsibility to protect our planet. This can be done through the use of governmental policies that follow a moral code. The following is a video from Greenpeace, a group whose mission is to protect the planet. In the video, I'm sure that you noticed the breathing, as if the Earth itself was taking breaths of fresh air. Although the planet itself does not take breaths, remember, our Earth is what allows us to breathe and survive. Our planet depends on us to care for all that live here. If we don't, climate changes may occur, plant life systems may be destroyed, and lives will perish. An example of what could be is in the picture on the right. My name is Amy Johnson, and I will be speaking about the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, a piece of legislation that is currently pending in the United States Senate. The pathway of this presentation will be through a PowerPoint presentation, a lecture that will last approximately 35 minutes, and a question and answer at the end that will last approximately 10 minutes. A little about myself. I'm a Pennsylvania State University student in my senior year studying energy and sustainability policy. During the last 2.5 years at Pennsylvania State University World Campus, I have taken several courses that have covered curriculum that is applicable to my research of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. Some of the courses I have taken are Geography 30, or Geographic Perspectives on Sustainability and Human Environment Systems, which I took during the spring semester of 2014. This course focuses on introducing students to the theory, methods, history, and contemporary issues with regional and global relationships. The purpose of this course is to define the situation between human activity and the physical environment surrounding humans. This course is applicable to the project because I did find a final project that required that I do extensive research on a specific topic. Another course I took was EGEE 401, or Energy in a Changing World, which I took during the summer semester of 2014. The purpose of this course was to understand the pressures of needing energy in the world, internationally and in the United States today. This course applies to my capstone project because for this course I did a research paper on a specific topic which required lengthy research and a professional tone to be written in my paper. Another course I took was English 202D, or Effective Writing Through Business Writing. In this course, I wrote reports and other common forms of business communications. I learned and developed the methods to write professionally. This course has benefited me in the writing portion of the capstone project and also in writing my speech that I presented to an audience. Another course I took was Geography 438W, or Human Dimensions of Global Warming. I took this course during the fall semester of 2015. This course focused on the human causes and consequences of global climate change and how policy affects global warming. This course was beneficial to my capstone project because it focused not only on the human causes of climate change, but I also honed in on my writing skills in a professional world. This course helped me critique my own work and gave me the skills to turn in a well-polished project. Another course that I took was Geography 432, or Energy Policy, which I took during the spring semester of 2015. This course focused on analyzing and formulating energy-related policies. It also taught about the implementation of regulations and other initiatives. This course was applicable to my capstone project because it educated me on how to research the policies relating to a specific topic and then how to analyze them. These courses were all beneficial for my research and analysis of a presentable capstone project. The objectives for this lecture are as follows: learning the background of the EPA, learning the background of the EPA Science Advisory Board, learning the background of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, to understand the purpose of this legislation, to know the parties involved, and to know how to contact the parties involved. The Environmental Protection Agency was created on December 2, 1970, when President Richard Nixon stated that he wanted a separate regulatory agency devoted solely to the pursuit of anti-pollution programs. This was in the wake of the new awareness of environmental degradation. According to the Environmental Protection Agency.net, the mission for the EPA is for the establishment and enforcement of environmental protection standards consistent with national environmental goals, the conduct of research on the adverse effects of pollution and on methods and equipment for controlling it, the gathering of information on pollution, and the use of this information in strengthening environmental protection programs and recommending policy changes, assisting others through grants, technical assistance, and other means in arresting pollution in the environment and assisting the Council on Environmental Quality in developing and recommending to the President new policies for the protection of the environment. Al Gore, an advocate for the prevention of future climate change, stated in his book, Earth in the Balance, Ecology and the Human Spirit. Al Gore stated, "There is a difference between scientific uncertainty and political uncertainty." He goes on to say that where science strives on the unknown, politics is often paralyzed by it. But without good science, the EPA cannot make informed decisions on political issues. The EPA Science Advisory Board was formed in 1978 when Congress directed the EPA to establish a board to review the quality and relevance of scientific information provided to the EPA and to offer scientific advice when requested. But after some time, changes needed to be made within the EPA Science Advisory Board, which led to the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Acts of 2013, 2014, and now 2015. As one author stated, quote, "Science must do what it can to provide some of these answers as best it can. Scientific uncertainty will always exist, and so policy decisions will have to be made in the face of scientific doubt." Unquote. Spencer, 2008, page 37. The EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 is an act to modify aspects of the EPA Science Advisory Board from previous reform acts. This legislation is meant to amend the Environmental Research, Development, and Demonstration Authorization Act of 1978 to define scientific advisory board member qualifications, public participation, and for other purposes, according to H.R. 1422, EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2014. It is also meant to modify previous versions of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act, according to H.R. 1422, EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2014. This piece of legislation is proposed to aid in the selection process of the Scientific Advisory Board and also speaks about the necessity for board members to gain advice from scientific advisors, as previous acts such as the Research, Development, and Demonstration Authorization Act of 1978 did not. The EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 was introduced to the House of Representatives on February 24, 2015. The act was amended by the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology on that same day. According to Congress.gov, this act passed and was agreed on in the House by a recorded vote of 236 to 181 on March 17, 2015, according to H.R. 1029 EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. Then, on March 18, 2015, the act was received by the Senate, read twice, and referred to the Committee on Environment and Public Works, according to H.R. 1029 EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. Congress.gov now shows that the legislation is in the introduction and referral stage of the action plan for the act. This act must be passed by the Senate, then the President of the United States, prior for it to becoming a law. The history of the piece of legislation is as follows. In the House of Representatives, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, also titled H.R. 1029, was introduced on February 24, 2015, to the House of Representatives. After the introduction, there was a vote of 17 to 12 that agreed that the legislation needed to be amended. This act was amended by the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology on March 2, 2015. On March 17, 2015, the bill was debated on, amended, and then passed in the House of Representatives at a vote of 236 to 181. From there, the bill was introduced then to the Senate. When the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 came to the House of Representatives, several amendments were made. The first amendment, House Amendment 74, prohibits an EPA Science Advisory Board member from participating in any advisory action for which there is evidence that the action may involve a specific party in which the member has an interest. This amendment was agreed upon by voice vote. Another amendment, House Amendment 75, is meant to prohibit individuals from sitting on the board if they are currently receiving EPA contracts or grants, and it would conditionally prohibit them from being allowed to apply for any EPA contracts or grants. This amendment was agreed on by a recorded vote of 242 to 175. According to author David Roberts, the sole purpose of the House Amendment 75, which was introduced by Representative David McKinley, is to prohibit the EPA Science Advisory Board from taking the reports of the U.S. Global Change Research Program's National Climate Assessment, the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report, the May 2013 Technical Update on the Social Costs of Carbon for Regulatory Impact Analysis under Executive Order 12866. This is July 2004 Pathways to Deep Decarbonization Report from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. These reports offer important information to the scientific community regarding climate change and emissions. Another amendment, House Amendment 76, requires the administrator of the EPA to solicit nominations for the advisory board membership from institutions of higher education and research institutions based in work relevant to that of the board. This amendment was agreed upon by voice vote also. The final amendment in the House of Representatives, House Amendment 77, is meant to, quote, to improve the selection of members for the EPA's Science Advisory Board by increasing transparency and ensuring balance among board participants and promotes public participation in the board's review process. This amendment failed by voice vote. The current status of the legislation is that it is in the Senate. For H.R. 1029, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, I obtained the information that on March 18, 2015, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act was received by the Senate, read twice, and referred to the Committee on Environment and Public Works. According to Congress.gov, the legislation is in the introduction and referral stage. The act must be passed by the Senate, then the President of the United States, prior to becoming a law. The legislation is still currently pending in the Senate as of March 18, 2015, after being received, read twice, and referred to the Committee on Environment and Public Works. According to Harms et al., published in 1994 on page 208, I learned that the Committee on Environment and Public Works has jurisdiction over a vast array of environmental issues, including air and water pollution, toxic and solid waste, endangered species, wetlands, fish and wildlife, and ocean dumping. The EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 is a piece of legislation that will be more than likely attached to another bill that when being decided by the Senate, as it was declared in an interview with Blake Dealey on September 22, 2015, from Representative David McKinley's office. As per my conversation with Mr. McKinley, the legislation must be decided on before the end of the next year, before the 115th Congress in 2017. There are several major players involved in the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. It is primarily a bill that is represented by the Republican Party. Representative Frank Lucas, a Republican from Oklahoma, is the sponsor of the bill. There are also 24 other co-sponsors of the legislation in the House of Representatives. On the opposing side are Democrats, such as Representative Suzanne Beaumont, a Democrat from Oregon, and Representative Jared Polis, a Democrat from Colorado, who both disagree with some of the rules of the legislation, according to Marcos. The support and opposition for the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act are as follows. The supporters are Representative David McKinley, Representative Michael Burgess, Representative Chris Stewart, Representative Lamar Smith, Congressman Frank Lucas, Congressman Colin Peterson, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, and the National Association of Manufacturers are all supporters of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. The opposition is the Union of Concerned Scientists, Natural Resources Defense Council, the Environmental Defense Fund, Earth Justice, Representative E. Bernice Johnson, Greenpeace, Clean Water Action, and the Sierra Club. In a handout that will be available after the lecture, I will provide the ways to reach your state representatives in the House and Senate, and also organizations that either support or oppose this piece of legislation. The supporters of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 are as follows. According to, on passage, H.R. 1029 EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, in the House of Representatives, those in favor of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 were Representative David McKinley, along with several other members from West Virginia, the state in which I reside, Representative Evan Jenkins, and Representative Alice Mooney, both Republicans. All of these individuals voted aye on the legislation. Regarding his support of the legislation, Representative McKinley's office responded in the form of a phone call on September 22, 2015, from a staff member in his office, Mr. Blake Dealey. According to the interview with Mr. Dealey, the office of Representative David McKinley was not concerned with any negatives of the legislation, only that the current legislation did not allow for total transparency, and that this bill would work to correct this. Mr. Dealey went on to say that this bill would not make any information more open, that this bill would make information more open to the public. Mr. Dealey stated that the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 would work to correct this. Mr. Dealey went on to say that this bill would make information more open to the public in the interview on September 22, 2015. Representative Michael Burgess is a Republican from the 26th District of Texas who supports the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. According to Atkin, 2014, Representative Michael Burgess states that the purpose of this bill is to, quote, increase transparency and accountability to the EPA's scientific advisors, unquote. He goes on to say that those on the Science Advisory Board, quote, excludes industry experts, but not officials for environmental advocacy groups, unquote. Atkin, 2014. The representative is also quoted saying that this legislation, quote, with the inclusion of industry interests, would erase any appearance of impropriety on the board, unquote. Atkin, 2014. Representative Chris Stewart. This congressman from Utah's 2nd District is also in favor of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, saying that there are not enough big industry actors in the Science Advisory Board. Representative Stewart said, quote, all we're asking is that there be some balance to those experts and that there be further transparency and understanding of who was selected, why they were selected, and why others were excluded, unquote. Atkin, 2014. He goes on to say, quote, we're losing valuable insight and valuable guidance because we don't include them in the process, unquote. Atkin, 2014. Representative Lamar Smith is a Republican from Texas' 21st District who supports the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. Representative Smith states that there are a lot of unknowns regarding the EPA's, quote, most expensive and burdensome regulations, such as its proposed ozone rules, which are based on data that not even the EPA has seen, unquote. Kolipara, 2015. He went on to say that this, quote, ensures that the decisions that affect every American are based on independently verified, unbiased scientific research, instead of on select data that is hidden behind closed doors, unquote. Kolipara, 2015. Congressman Frank Lucas, a Republican from Oklahoma, is responsible for sponsoring the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. When asked about the legislation, Congressman Lucas stated, quote, this is a good government bill. It reflects the values we should uphold regardless of which side of the political aisle we are on. This bill recognizes the important role science should play in our policy debates and provides safeguards to give the public confidence in science. It restores the Independent Science Advisory Board as a defender of scientific integrity, unquote, according to House passes Lucas' bill to promote scientific integrity at EPA 2015. Congressman Lucas declared to the House that the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act, quote, strengthens public participation and opportunities for the public to comment, reinforces peer review requirements, and reduces conflicts of interest, provides opportunities for dissenting panelists to make their views known, requires communication of uncertainties in scientific findings and conclusions, unquote. From the House passes Lucas bill to promote scientific integrity of EPA, 2015. In addition to Congressman Lucas, Congressman Colin Peterson from Minnesota also sponsored the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. When asked about the legislation, this Democrat stated, quote, the Scientific Advisory Board's work is important to making sure that the EPA considers all scientific information when writing regulations that will impact American farmers, families, and small businesses, unquote. From Lucas, Peterson introduces bipartisan bill to strengthen EPA independent scientific advice, 2015. Congressman Peterson goes on to state, quote, this legislation builds on the work done in the 2014 Farm Bill and is necessary to ensure that the EPA takes into account the best information possible with input from public and independent stakeholders. The balanced and independent Science Advisory Board will help alleviate some of the unintended consequences surrounding the EPA regulations, unquote. From Lucas, Peterson introduces bipartisan bill to strengthen EPA independent scientific advice. 2015. One organization that supports the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act is the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, or SBE Council. SBE Council is a nonprofit advocacy, research, education, and networking organization that supports the Act. The mission of this organization is to, quote, protect small business and promote entrepreneurship, unquote, from About Us 2015. The organization supports the legislation because, quote, the piece of legislation reforms the EPA's Science Advisory Board and its subpanels by strengthening public participation, improving the process for selecting expert advisors, expanding transparency requirements, allowing the voice and views of dissenting scientists to be heard, and limiting non-scientific policy advice, unquote, from the SBE Council 2015. The group goes on to state, quote, the reforms proposed by S 543 are especially critical given the growing impact of EPA's regulations on America's small business sector and the expedient science used as a basis to advance controversial and costly rulemaking, unquote, from the SBE Council 2015. An additional organization that supports the Act is the National Association of Manufacturers, or NAM. This organization consists of 11,000 manufacturing companies and around 2 million workers in the United States. Their funding comes from membership fees charged and their association with various corporations. The mission of NAM is to, quote, enhance the competitiveness of manufacturers by shaping a legislative and regulatory environment, unquote, from Press Releases 2015. NAM supports the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because they believe it would, quote, modernize the policies and procedures governing the Science Advisory Board of the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that the SAB, or Science Advisory Board, is best equipped to provide independent, transparent, and balanced reviews of the science that the EPA uses to guide its regulatory decisions, unquote, from Eisenberg 2015. Those that oppose the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 are as follows. One group that opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 is the Union of Concerned Scientists. The Union of Concerned Scientists, quote, puts rigorous independent science to work to solve the planet's most pressing problems. Joining with citizens across the country, they combine technical analysis and effective advocacy to create innovative, practical solutions for a healthy, safe, and sustainable future, unquote. From Rosenberger, October 2nd, 2015. In an interview with Andrew Rosenberg, the director of the Center for Science and Democracy for the Union of Concerned Scientists, Dr. Rosenberg declared with his opinion about the transparency of the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. Dr. Rosenberg stated, "No, I don't think it will help with transparency. If in fact Dr. Rosenberg stated in his email, quote, "No, I don't think it will help with transparency. In fact, I think the opposite, since it is encouraging more industry members who are likely to be basing their views on confidential business information and discouraging academics from offering views about other than published work. As it is, the Science Advisory Board makes information public unless there are confidentiality provisions. This is in accord with EPA practice, and it is the agency that would decide not to make information public, not the board. There is nothing in the Act that would be helpful in this regard on my reading of it," unquote, from October 2nd, 2015. In fact, Dr. Rosenberg believes quite the opposite of those in Representative David McKinley's office, and he was confident in his opinion in the pending legislation. When asked about his opinion of the legislation, Dr. Rosenberg responded, quote, "I oppose the bill because it tips the scales in favor of more industry influence on the regulatory process, even though industry already has the upper hand and has too much influence in my opinion. An opinion shared by many agency scientists according to our surveys just released. It does nothing to improve the process but bogs it down in additional procedures that can only really benefit industry and lobbyists, but not the public, scientists, nor streamline the agency process. So it will accomplish the opposite of what its purpose is to do. It is a case of deceptive messaging by the bill sponsors and their industry supporters. It turns the idea of conflict of interest protections on its head by adopting a premise that scientists that have the grants from EPA are conflicted and can't serve, but industry-based scientists are not conflicted and should be given some priority. It is disincentives for independent scientists to agree to serve on the board. It says all information given to the board to consider must be made publicly available by the agency, but some information cannot be public because it's important for the board to consider, such as confidential health records used in analysis of public health impacts. So it prevents the board from considering all information, and it provides for endless rounds of public comments on the science with written responses, which bogs on the board down in procedure but doesn't do anything to improve the process," unquote. From October 2nd, 2015, the email. The Union of Concerned Scientists is opposed to the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because the EPA would not be allowed to release confidential information. For the EPA to act on data they receive, the information must be released to the public. As Rosenberg et al. States, quote, "In other words, the EPA may not act on the basis of data it is legally restricted from releasing. Therefore, it may not act," unquote. Rosenberg et al., 2015, page 966. If the information is deemed confidential, the EPA may not release it, meaning that the EPA cannot work to enact policy. The Natural Resources Defense Council is another group that opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. This group is a not-for-profit, tax-exempt environmental action organization of more than 2 million members, which consists of lawyers, scientists, and other professionals. From About Us, 2015, NRDF. The funding for this group comes from donations of members, foundation grants, and government grants. From About Us, 2015, NRDF. The mission of this group is, quote, "to safeguard the earth, its people, its plants and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends," unquote. From Mission, 2015. The Natural Resources Defense Council opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because it would cause the EPA to ignore significant science. The Science Advisory Board would be required to ignore conflicts of interest, and enforcement officials would be required to ignore pollution emitted in violation of the law, unquote. From Blue Green Alliance et al., 2015. The Environmental Defense Fund is another group that opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. This group is a nonprofit environmental advocacy group that uses funding, governmental grants, and donations from foundations to fund their operation. The group consists of over 500 scientists, economists, and other professionals. About Us, 2015, PDF. The mission of the Environmental Defense Fund is to preserve the natural systems on which all life depends. Quote, guided by science and economists, they find practical and lasting solutions to the most serious environmental problems. Unquote. Our Mission and Values, 2015. The Environmental Defense Fund opposes the bill because it would severely, quote, weaken the context and credibility of the Science Advisory Board reviews, unquote, because of the fact that scientists with financial conflicts of interest would be allowed to participate with the Science Advisory Board. Blue-Green Alliance et al., 2015. Another organization, Earth Justice, is a group that also opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. This group of 200 plus employees is a nonprofit public law organization that receives funding from donations and various foundations. From Our Story, 2015. The mission of this group is to, quote, use the power of law and the strength of partnership to protect people's health, to preserve magnificent places and wildlife, to advance clean energy, and to combat climate change, unquote. Our Story, 2015. Their motto is, quote, we are here because the earth needs a good lawyer, unquote. Our Story, 2015. Earth Justice opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because it possesses language that, quote, would result in committee of non-experts lacking firsthand in-depth knowledge of the topic under discussion, unquote. National Resources Defense Council et al., 2013. They also stated that the bill is, quote, written broadly and would have damaging impacts far in excess of what their sponsors will admit, unquote. Blue-Green Alliance et al., 2015. An act such as the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 goes against the beliefs of Earth Justice. One individual that opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 is Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson. This Democrat from the 30th District of Texas is an individual that opposes the act for various reasons. According to an article written on the American Associate for Advancement of Science website, some opponents say the legislation would do little good. Colipara, 2014. Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson stated, quote, these bills are the culmination of one of the most anti-science and anti-health campaigns I've witnessed in my 22 years as a member of Congress, unquote. Colipara, 2014. Representative Johnson believes this because the act is not for the benefit of the public, but instead serves the interests of certain industries by making it much simpler for industry-affiliated scientists to serve on the EPA's Science Advisory Board. Colipara, 2014. Additional reasons are that this act serves to make it more difficult, quote, for academic scientists to provide their expertise to EPA, increasing the likelihood that industry experts, those with obvious financial conflicts of interest, will be able to skew the recommendations of the board, unquote. Colipara, 2014. Representative Johnson is quoted saying, quote, any effort to limit the scope of science that can be considered by EPA does not strengthen scientific integrity, but instead undermines it, unquote. Colipara, 2014. This act is destined to also, quote, create needless and endless delays in scientific review process, allowing industry more time to halt, derail, or slow EPA actions that seek to protect public health, unquote. Colipara, 2014. Greenpeace is another nonprofit charitable organization that has over 250,000 members in the United States and 2.8 million worldwide, about 2015. Their source of funding comes almost entirely from donations of its supporters. Greenpeace does not endorse political candidates, nor do they accept governmental contributions. Greenpeace is proud to be, quote, the leading independent campaigning organization that uses peaceful protest and creative communication to expose global environmental problems and to promote solutions that are essential to a green and peaceful future, unquote. About 2015. This organization opposes the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because the bill, quote, will obstruct the implementation and enforcement of critical environmental statutes, undermine the EPA's ability to consider and use science, and jeopardize public health, unquote. Blue-Green Alliance et al., 2015. Clean Water Action is one of the top grassroots environmental organizations in the United States today. There are over 1 million members in the organization. Clean Water Action receives their funding from the donations of its members instead of foundation grants and government funding. The group is opposed to the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because the legislation is meant to significantly broaden the scope of the Science Advisory Board, creating, quote, a comment process that will add needless delay to the board's work, unquote. From the Blue-Green Alliance et al., 2015. According to a letter written to the House of Representatives, this would result in the, quote, further stalling and undermining of important public health, safety, and environmental protections, unquote. From the Blue-Green Alliance et al., 2015. Sierra Club is a nonprofit grassroots environmental organization of more than 2 million members. Their funding comes from donations primarily of its members and also from funding received from groups such as the Democracy Alliance. The mission statement of Sierra Club is to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth, to practice and promote the responsible use of the earth's ecosystems and resources, to educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore the quality of the natural and human environment, and to use all lawful means to carry out these objectives. From the Policies, 2015. This organization is opposed to the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015 because, quote, the bill will add unnecessary new burdens on the Science Advisory Board, distorting its mission and altering its process with no benefit to the EPA or the public. From the Blue-Green Alliance et al., 2015. This legislation would cause the opposite of Sierra Club's beliefs to occur, which would result in less education and failing to protect humanity. And that concludes my presentation on the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015. Thank you everyone for listening. For any further questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to contact me at my cell phone number 484-557-1757 or at my personal email. Thank you.